Alrighty, well, after a hiatus, we are going to come back to Dragging Up the Past. And so Brant's back and Jim's back. Hi, Jim.
Hello, hello, hello.
And we are diving through the past of Dragon Magazine, taking a look at what was going on in our gaming careers, what was going on in gaming as a whole at the time that each of these issues came out. And yes, we are intentionally skipping around so that we're not sort of watching ants march across the screen. We're jumping around and talking about the zeitgeist of gaming at each one of these episodes. And so here we are, Dragon Magazine 84. You want to take a guess as to when this was?
Is it late 83?
This is actually the only time that the episode, that the issue number and the year coincided.
Oh, really? So this is 1984.
This is 1984. This is 84. And we will get to specifically year and month here in a second. But we grabbed this one on purpose because there's something particularly new about this one in the Dragon Magazine Pantheon, and so we will get there shortly.
Awesome.
So, well, there's not too much to say about the cover other than I would love to have a study that looked like that. I really want a giant floor globe. I think it would be neat to have. I think it would be neat to have one of those giant floor globes that opens up to the bar underneath it.
I have one.
Yeah, I figured. Of course you do.
I won't say it's anywhere near as nice as that one, but I actually bought it for my wife for a anniversary present, and it still sits in the main gaming room.
Well, there you are. There you are. Alrighty, so this Create Your Own Ral Partha masterpiece. So, interestingly, you were just talking about putting yourself on a miniature figure. Here you can actually create this month's Ral Partha masterpiece, giant werebear and man form sculpted by. And so for some free painting instructions. But Ral Partha at one point tried to actually do some miniatures of people for themselves somewhere along the way.
Yeah, this is...
But in this case, they're talking about painting your own.
Right. No, I was mentioning the fact, and I hope to have a piece for the GrogHeads in the not too distant future, that now we're in the era of 3D printing and resin printing of miniatures. And there's a company out now that'll put your 3D scanned head on a miniature. But, Ral Partha was the sum and substance of my minis, and the only exception being the minifigs for Napoleonics. But for everything else, it was Ral Partha.
Yep. I'm just waiting for the person who gets their 3D printed head put on the ogre. Right?
I don't think that'll take long.
With minimal editing. Oh, I'm sure someone will do it to someone else as a gag gift.
That's another point too.
Alrighty. Let's scoot on down a page. The mandatory first inside page ad for Ice. We're all the way up to Lore Master here. So what they've done is they've taken Arms Law, Spell Law, Claw Law, all of those things. They've actually put a world around it. And I've never met anyone who ever actually played any of this.
Remember, folks, Dragging Up the Past asks you to post in the forums if you know anyone that has played the Log series or Lore Master. We don't, and we know a lot of nerds.
That may be a massive understatement. But yeah, I know a lot of people who owned Ice products.
Oh, absolutely.
Don't know a single person that played them.
Still do. Yeah, and I'm sure people, and it doesn't count, by the way, if you borrowed an idea here or there.
Yeah.
That does not count. You have to have played the game.
Yeah, not just the giant book of spell disasters or critical hits,
which everybody loves.
Yes. But you had to actually have rolled a character, taken that character on an adventure, with some form of GM, not just you reading a book as like a choose your own adventure.
That's what we're talking about.
Somebody that's actually sat down and gamed a session or more with Ice. All right, so here are our contents. I will tell you, just from snooping through a variety of Dragon magazines, to find a good one for this episode. I will tell you, the Magic No Transparency signature box, this is a persistent and consistent and annoyingly frustrating thing for quite some while. Oh, yeah. Absolute pain in the butt. This is not something that we've been able to get them to get rid of at all. So, but here we go. We are in April of 84. Now, okay. I will tell you this. Normally, the April issues are kind of the humor joke issues. There's not a lot in this one that's April Fool's stuff. And I even tell you that over here. That I settle on a subject for a column. Actually, Roger decided it for me. Not much of an April Fool's issue, is it? There's not a lot of goofy material in this one. So
I've just become accustomed to asking. I graduated high school 1 month after this. So I was pretty aware of music at the time, and I knew instantly what the biggest song in America was in April of 1984.
When Doves Cries Later in the Summer.
That's correct.
April of 84. Give me a second here. It's got to be something from Huey Lewis and the News, right? From the sports album?
That's the time of it, but it isn't.
Wow, it's not.
Bigger than that. This was ubiquitous, unavoidable.
Is it Jump from Van Halen?
It is not. You're shooting.
I'm probably going to name like 6 of the top 10 and still not get there. Oh boy, because 84 is right in my wheelhouse of music of when I actually started to care. This is post Come On Feel the Noise and Quiet Riot, because that was 83.
Correct.
This is pre-Purple Rain, because that released in July of 84. So I'm trying to think somewhere in here. We've got Elton John with, I guess that's why they call it the blues, and Sad Songs Say So Much was right in this same era. I mean, Style Council was releasing stuff around now, but nobody in the U.S. gave a rip. Van Halen's 1984 was all over the place at the time. Pointer Sisters were big at the time. Lay it on me. What am I missing?
Phil Collins, Against All Odds.
Oh, good Lord. Of all the Phil Collins tunes.
And it was, I think it's still his biggest hit.
Yeah, if I'm Phil Collins, I'm not bragging about that.
And also, Weird Al had his until I believe his Mandatory Fun album, his biggest single, which was "Eat It."
Eat It,
which was 15 that week. Weird. So my guy Weird Al. But yeah, you named a whole bunch of the other ones. But no, Phil Collins, Against All Odds.
Yeah. I know the sports album was big that summer, because Huey Lewis and the News had like 6 of the top 100 hits at the end of the year. That year, they had a bunch. Of note, that summer I actually caught a big music festival in Munich. We were living in Germany at the time, and Huey Lewis was one of the bands there. It was Night Ranger, Rick Springfield, Huey Lewis, Saga, Foreigner, and a couple of European bands that nobody's ever heard of. Of note, one of which was a German dude from Munich. So instead of his normal 45 minutes, they gave him almost 2 hours on stage because it was the hometown crowd, and none of the Americans in the crowd had a clue who this dude was. So.
Well, I will also say that yes, you're right. This week also dropped The Heart of Rock and Roll. There you go. The Reflex by Duran Duran.
Yep.
And the other song by Wang Chung that isn't Everybody Have Fun, which is Dance Hall Days.
Yes, which was the one that predated Everybody Have Fun, right?
Right. That's correct.
Yeah.
But this was the that's the other hit that they got. So they weren't a one-hit wonder; they were a 2-hit wonder. April of '84. Good.
Well, what the '80s gave us was the one album wonder, right? Mm-hmm. You had one album with multiple songs, and then the band would disappear. Like the Motels had. There were multiple songs from Motels, multiple songs from Quarter Flash, multiple songs from Chilliwack, and then they would disappear.
Thompson Twins.
Yes. So, and if they got another hit that wasn't on their one album, it was usually something from a movie soundtrack.
Ooh, and here's a bar bet. the number 10 song was Tracy Ullman's I Don't Know, or They Don't Know.
They Don't Know, the one with Paul McCartney at the end of the video.
It. Jeez.
Yep.
My goodness.
I remember that video well. So, all right.
April 84.
Were you going to dig up the movie, or just we going to keep on going so we can actually talk game stuff?
I was going to give it to you. You gotta let me know what's the top 10 movies of May. What's the top 1 movie, I should say, of April 84?
Yeah, I suck at the movie stuff. I get the music ones pretty well, but I suck at the movie stuff. What's the movie that the song "Against All Odds" was from? Or was it the movie was "Against All Odds"? Right?
Against All Odds. That's right.
Is that the movie?
It is not the top April. Remember, because this is the April movie.
Yes, the top grossing movie released in April.
Right, and that's our big thing. And this is, once again, I do love my childhood and I love my teen years, and I'm just counting down to see how many of these I've seen. I'm at more than half, which kind of makes me want to hurt myself. Very good.
It's not Big Trouble in Little China, huh?
It is not, and the reason that's funny is I just watched it with my son last night, as I was mentioning. But no, the number 1 movie in America in April of 1984, Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter.
And there have been how many more of them since The Final Chapter? Right,
Dirty Lies. And let's see, The Toxic Avenger was number 2. And it'll show you, folks, that cinema is not uniformly precious.
Oh, no.
Absolutely crazy. But, yeah, so we had Phil Collins telling us to take a look at me now, and Jason Voorhees' quote, final chapter, end quote.
Yeah. All right, so here's what we've got. We've got a D&D tournament module in two installments. So the second half of this actually appeared in another issue. But the special attraction, this one, the kind of milestone in here, was this Ares section. So this is very shortly after TSR took over SPI and bought them out and absorbed SPI's game catalog as well as their magazine catalog. Now, of course, TSR had the infamous little crapshoot that I know you are very familiar with of, hey, those lifetime subscriptions to S&T Magazine.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we're defining those as the lifetime of the fruit fly, not as the lifetime of the human being that may have subscribed.
Namely you.
Yes. So, but one of the things that they did do is they took the Ares magazine, which was the sci-fi focused gaming magazine by SPI, and they folded it into Dragon Magazine for some number of years as its own separate section in the back of the magazine. And this was the first one that they did that with. And so when we talk about a milestone issue 84 isn't a numeric milestone, it's a content milestone, and that's what we're looking at here. And so going back over here to Kim Mohan's intro column, after 3 years, Phil Foglio has decided to give himself some time away from Phil and Dixie. So this is the last installment of What's New, but it's the first installment of Ares. So this is like the only issue where those two overlap. But that's what's going on. All right, content nerd alert. The typography gets all over the place right in here where the people are, because Jim Holloway is the only one that gets a sans serif font. Roger Raup gets some incredible kerning in there. And Robert Dewey has a completely gacked up set of typography in there that I think they probably just pasted in after the fact. So yeah, that's what we're looking at for this issue of Dragon. We're gonna skip out on a limb, aren't we? Like the letters column?
I would think so.
Or is there anything in there you really want to talk about?
I always do, but I sometimes think it's interesting only to you and I. Yeah. But we must observe, however, that Games Workshop, the titan that it is, has not always advertised the same way.
No.
This is such a strange ad, conceptually. Yes. Bearing in mind, these are the folks that give us Warhammer 40K.
Yep.
Great moments in American history. In 1849, the two words that shook America were Sutter's Mill. In 1984, Those two words are Citadel Miniatures.
Yep.
What? What in the blue hell does GW have to do with a gold rush? Nothing other than somebody at Gaithersburg, Maryland, had nothing else to put into the copy.
Yeah.
Such a weird ad.
And it's not like Sutter's Mill resonates with gamers.
Thank you. I thought that too. I thought, what? How is this? What are you talking about? Why is Great Moments in America? Never mind. I'll go on far too long on this one. And this, by the way, is number 4.
Yeah, I was about to say, we're going to have to keep our eyes peeled for the other great moments.
I want to see what the other ones were, because boy, oh boy, was that one bad.
And you wonder if a British games company is going to include Yorktown in the great moments in American history.
Right.
If, that's number 1.
Right.
So James Bond, the game, has been around for a little while now. We've actually got a whole bunch of product out, and for all the mediocrity that was the game, as a game, the supplements were incredibly well written. They were easy to read. They were easy to follow. They were great companions to the movies if you were a fan of the movies. The For Your Information Game Master supplement had a lot of great movie lore in there, and so that was cool. But as a game, it was kind of mediocre, because, the whole point of playing the James Bond game is to play James Bond, right? And yet, right. they sort of steer you away from that as much as possible. So,
and let's face it, the makers of James Bond have been gracious enough to keep churning out content for them. So
yeah. Oh well, and the other thing that I think really, we've talked in the past about the role-playing game. But something that I thought about, as I was in a game store here locally and flipping through and saw a handful of the James Bond things, but I was sort of flipping through in a rack that was right next to a room where there was a role-playing session going on in it at the local game store here, and at that moment, sort of the light went on as to what was wrong with the James Bond role-playing game. How many James Bond movies involved a collaborative session, a collaborative team saving the day beyond Bond and whoever he ends up sleeping with at the end of the movie?
Correct.
There's no team involved at all. And yet the whole point of, the role-playing game is to get the group together to go do something.
That's right.
So, it's almost like the Bond games were made for a one-on-one adventure, not a group adventure. So, I think that's where they went wrong. My 2 cents. Lords of Creation.
Oh, God.
I knew you were going to have some fun with that one.
Oh, this game is such a dumpster fire. Folks, this is what happens. This is what happens when a company like Avalon Hill, obviously a legend of gaming, goes, hey, how did we miss out on D&D? We shouldn't have missed out on D&D. I know what we'll do. We'll do a fantasy. No, we can't do a fantasy game because that's D&D. Well, we'll do a hyper-complicated fantasy game. No, that's spell law, claw law, ICE. They got that booked. I know what we'll do. We'll do a game system that allows you to game anything. And it's bad. It's really, really bad.
Well, I'll tell you, history repeats itself 10 years later. Because 10 years later, in the early / mid-90s, what was the great game fad of the moment? Magic the Gathering, right?
Magic the Gathering, yep.
And what did every company suddenly have to have?
A collectible card game.
And how many of them were any good?
Slim and none.
3, maybe?
Well, and again, every one of them that I played, I didn't play many. I certainly could never. If you go to, I don't know if they still have them there at Gen Con, but there is a company, Chimera Hobbies, out of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, of all places, that brings in, I call it the graveyard of broken dreams.
Yeah.
It's where all these old CCGs, you can buy a box of them for $5. And, from that level, it's fun to do.
Yeah.
It's if you want to grab a game that you've never heard of and get the joy of opening up 100 packs and you've spent less than $10.
Oh yeah.
I'm not exaggerating. As a matter of fact, my favorite, of course, I'm biased, is Eagles, the Napoleonic one that the guys at Columbia Games came out with. When that was originally a collectible game.
Yeah.
And now I just went to Gen Con a bunch of years ago and bought 4 cases. And I said, okay, now I'm going to build all my decks. And I had a great time with it.
It was like $8, right?
oh yeah, And so if you do it at that level, they're great. But you're right. To collect them, to spend $350 for a booster pack, oh heavens no.
Yeah. But that's what Lords of Creation was. Avalon Hill wanted to jump on the role-playing bandwagon because they saw Traveler and RuneQuest and Tunnels and Trolls and D&D, which was it's not a trinity. What is it? A quadrinity? What do you call 4 of them? Right? I mean,
a group.
Yeah, but those were the almighty 4.
There you go.
Yeah, those were the almighty 4 that were sort of taking over the world at the time. Interestingly, though, Lords of Creation attempted to be a generic universal role-playing system. Predates GURPS by 2 years, 3 years.
I was just looking that up.
Yeah, so it'd been around for a while, but this was very clearly Avalon Hill wanted a piece of the role-playing market because the role-playing market was exploding, and it sucked, right? It was bad. It tried to be too many things to too many people instead of starting small and building.
It was wildly not play-tested. It was wildly not balanced. The futuristic powers didn't work. It says in the ad, the combat system is designed to handle any situation, from sword play through rifle fire to blaster shots. No, it doesn't. Okay? That is not true.
Well, it provides rules for them. It doesn't really deal with them well.
Right. And so, yeah, this is quite something. I think I still have my set because I certainly built more than my share of characters for this and tried it out because that's how you did things back then.
Yep.
You bought the rules and you made characters for it by the dozens.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, we're sitting here sort of slagging Avalon Hill for jumping on the bandwagon, and yet SPI's role-playing forays with both Dragon Quest and Universe were well-focused, unplayable games. This was an unfocused, unplayable game. Right. Exactly, Dragon Quest was extremely well-focused. Universe was extremely well-focused. It was completely unplayable, but it was very well-focused.
It was. I still am. Well, we've discussed this before, but Universe is one of those games where that one even more than Claw Lost Bella. I know a lot of people that have built planets in Universe.
Yeah.
I know a lot because it was a really cool system to build. It never quite worked. It never quite made sense, but it was neat to do back in the days before computers could render such things.
And how many of them have ever played a game of Universe?
Have ever had their character actually set foot on one of those planets?
Exactly. Or Delta V, the Air War equivalent of space combat.
Okay, just be careful. I love Delta V. I'll play Delta V today. I'll bring it to Origins. I have Delta V. It actually became the little game based on it was World Killer.
Yeah.
And World Killer still has yet to be bested in my mind for some of what it does.
Yeah. All right, we're going to move off of Lords of Creation here because we are way spiraling off on a tangent, but
that'll happen.
That's sort of what we do, right?
Rolling.
Interestingly, they've got a question about an article, subject you'd like us to cover or not cover. So here's how to get your feedback back to TSR, because we couldn't just hop on an internet message board and vent our spleens there, much less, harass people with email bombs. And then if you're interested in contributing, first thing you need is our guidelines. So here's how you get a copy of them. You don't go to our webpage. Such things don't exist yet. I kept mine
for Steve Jackson games. I don't have them for Dragon.
Yeah. That's how you got to be a piece of all of this. Is you first had to get the writing guidelines by sending them a self-addressed stamped envelope for them to put them in and send them back to you.
And parenthetically, and I actually, as you know, a lot of the guys that became luminaries in this field started that way.
There are guys that became luminaries in other fields that started that way. We found Mark Andreessen in another issue of this, remember?
Yes, we did.
So,
and so those folks started the way, but it was always interesting because they were actually fairly strict guidelines.
yeah.
They're no joke, and they expected a certain level of quality. So, and this is again days before word processors, day before the Google Docs could format your stuff for you.
Well, and part of that is because, as Gary Gygax liked to point out, if you were a quality writer, you would write for Dragon, and if you weren't, you would go write for those self-published little fanzines.
Yes.
All right. Cast of Strange Familiars. The Magic User's Best Friend comes in many shapes and sizes. I will tell you, I've always found familiars to be a very nifty concept that never seemed to be sufficiently explored in actual gaming. I was never around a group that really used them a bunch, and not because anybody thought they were bad or broken. I just don't think anybody ever bothered, which is a little unfortunate because I always thought it was a nifty concept.
I do too. This is one of those articles that I'm going to give a huge thumbs up to. This is the kind of article, I don't remember it, which is strange because I would have liked to have this, where I would have grabbed it and stuffed it in my D&D book, because not only is it for the familiars, which is cool, and I'll talk about it in a second, but I love these stats that they've got a nice little chart of, very simple, straightforward numbers for dealing with these characters, or these creatures.
Yep.
But that said, I think part of it may go to something you said about the James Bond stories. The familiars get even more relevant when you're playing with one person.
Yeah.
They, in effect, become a character. It's interesting, though. We're playing a lot of Gloomhaven at my house, and my wife's first character anyway, is the Tinkerer. And the Tinkerer has a familiar. And it's interesting to watch how those things do become characters if you let them be. And certainly in my greater pen and paper days, I did have people that had them. So this is neat.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm slowly scrolling through here so people get a chance to sort of kind of read or at least, glance through. And there's familiars find themselves in multiple places in folklore throughout the mythos out there. So this is one of those places where D&D extends beyond its Tolkien roots, right? And so this is something that shows up in a variety of places, and so this is a neat idea that was, in my mind, usually underdeveloped. Here's a handful of different familiars that you can find, right? Domestic cats versus wild cats. You can have a cock. You can have a crow. You can have a gull. So there's all kinds of them, conveniently alphabetically listed for you. I do like how it says you've got 34 familiars to find, but hey, let's list 40. Let's list 38, actually. So, although a couple of them are doubled up, so I guess maybe it does come back to actually 34. All right, so here's a couple of examples of some graphics for you. My only real beef in all of this is, couldn't you put one of those pictures on this page? Can we get away from the wall of text? Layout nerd guy, I know.
I'm with you. I'm just going to let you roll. I know you got your thing.
Where are the stats you were wanting to get to? Are we still not there yet, or was it the table at the beginning?
No, it's the table at the beginning.
Yeah. All right, let's get back in there. So, here you go. Pretty simple stats, right?
Well, and they should be, right?
Yeah. Nothing overly fancy about them. You can develop them for yourself later. So
what the things that they can do, and what's their armor class, and how many hits, how fast. That's all I want.
Yeah.
And again, it gives me the ability. It's a nice little chart. Should you ever want to encounter such a thing, make it talk or whatever,
Yep. Definitely. All right. The riddle of the ring.
Okay, folks. This is going to be yet another one of those moments where old guys, Brant and Jim older than Brant, says, "Don't you ever not appreciate how great your board games look today."
Yeah.
Just you don't you ever. This is what we got to play. Look at that golem at the lower right.
So here's Here's what I will say. An ad like this, with art like this, went to great lengths to inspire 6th and 7th grade me to look at this and go, yeah, I can do game stuff. Right? If that's the art that I've got to compete with,
if that's the bar,
I can clear this. Right? I'm okay. So,
oh my goodness,
yeah.
this is just so. I can only imagine what the art on the cards was like.
Yeah, I would have to imagine it because I don't want to see it. So,
and I love the fact that they very carefully, if you read the little text at the bottom, avoided any direct reference to the copyrighted part of Tolkien's stuff.
Yeah.
They basically said, well, Frodo isn't a copyrighted word. Neither is Gandalf. We could talk about Riddle of the Ring.
Yeah.
I just this is so bad. I almost want to find a copy and find out just what it was like.
Yeah, I don't.
You're good?
I'm good.
Whoa. Oh, and it was $20.
Which was a good chunk of change in that day.
Yeah, that was not a cheap game.
As we shall see as we move forward through here.
Not cheap.
Yep. All right. We've taken the dice out of fighting. The Lost Worlds Nova game books. There it is, folks. This is your analog first-person shooter.
Yep.
That's what that is. All right. Gen Con 17, were you there?
Oh, yeah. You kidding me? I certainly was. And you can see that it was held at the beautiful, and it's a lovely campus, the University of Wisconsin Parkside, very tree-lined and all this stuff. And again, if you go get that convention card, there is a big Waterloo game at that one. That, I believe, is the con at which I bought the Complete Brigadier, because the guys all standing around in the Napoleon hats were all playing a massive 20-millimeter Napoleonic game using Complete Brigadier. So, oh, heavens, yes. And now, it is, what do you say other than holy cow? But, Gen Con is sold out.
Yeah.
Gen Con is the sold-out event, and here it is at the UW
60,000 people, and it's sold out.
Yeah. And they keep biggering and biggering. Blessed always.
Interestingly, we're starting to see on multiple pages interior color.
Yes. And how appropriate. It cracks me up that it's Poly S.
Yeah. Well.
Because Poly S is big-time wargamer paint. They and Ralph Partha swapped blows to be the lead. I mean, these days, again, you kids these days, when you go to Historicon now and look at what you can paint miniatures with, there are whole systems with detailed color-matched paints for World War II tanks, all this. But back in the day, Ralph Partha and Poly S were the big acrylic competitors. So it's very interesting to me to see this ad.
Yep.
Because and the other thing was, Ralph Partha would have just the right color for the Prussians, and Poly S would have just the right color for the French, and so you always had to have a mix to get it down right. So, and then of course you did the thing that you see depicted here: when your paint pot was empty, it magically became a holder for your figures while you were painting them.
Yep, which was handy.
Oh yes. Although I will say Poly S lids tended to dry out more quickly than the Ralph Partha ones, but that's just a memory.
I also note in the background who are some of the packages that we've got there. We've got the Fantasy Lords guys from Grenadier.
Oh, yeah.
So the rare non-Ralph Partha hit that was there. So
yeah, those are the guys. They were making a hard run at GW to take over to try to compete in the world of Warhammer.
Yeah. The Ecology of the Trapper, we're going to skip right past that.
Although I will note, you see who it's by?
Ed Greenwood, yes.
That
doesn't make it any more interesting.
No, it doesn't. It does, other than the fact that it is Ed Greenwood.
Yes. But the Ecology articles, I found them to be quite dreadful.
Well, we've already made the comment about I don't quite understand the purpose.
Yes. Well, it's world building. It is general world building, and so I kind of get that. But I got it. The trapper lays there, looks like a floor, eats your people until they hack their way out of it. Okay, fine. Is that really worth like 1,500 words worth of attempting to describe, the life and times of the trapper?
You know the answer to that.
Yeah. We're moving on. The Worlds of Boris Vallejo by Mayfair Games.
Yes.
All right. And this spectacular board game from Mayfair. It was gorgeous. It really was. Thank God, because it was an awful game.
Well, there you go.
But it was beautiful. It was beautiful. To harken back to our earlier CCG conversation, it was reminiscent. The CCG equivalent of this was the Guardians CCG with art by the Hildebrandt brothers. The Hildebrandt brothers are fantastic fantasy artists, have done a ton of great art over their lifespans, and the Guardians artwork is awesome. It is really phenomenal. It's a dreadful card game to play.
And here it is trying to tell me that it's swords and sorcery at its finest.
Well, the artwork, that's a fair description, right?
Yes.
Boris's artwork is incredible.
I have noticed that Boris's work has started to get expensive.
Yeah. Well, what's also interesting is find somebody under 30 who knows who Boris is.
Well, they know his art.
Probably.
From the side of a van, if nothing else.
Yeah, but I'll bet more of them know who Larry Elmore is.
Oh, that's not you can't dispute that.
What would be an interesting toss-up is, do they know Boris better than they know Frazetta? Which one?
One of Frank Spider just sold for a fortune.
Yeah. People under 30, drop us a line. Do you recognize Boris more or less than Frazetta?
That's what we should do. We should do a GrogHeads Twitter poll.
Except that I think all of our Twitter followers are on the north side of the 40 line because we're war gamers.
All of you under 30, the 6 of you, please answer.
I was about to say that's going to be a small sample size. Our figure feature, we're still doing.
Yeah, I'm surprised
black.
At that.
We're still doing black backgrounds. But so two things. One, the contrast has gotten better over the years, but two, the figures have gotten better. Right? Now, these images aren't great because they're digital scans. I got all that. But the figures have gotten better. These are actually nifty-looking figures. The Atlantean Marines. Right? I've seen these figures in real life. They actually look cool. These were some well-done figures. Over here, the Centaur with the Centaur Archer. Fantastic figure. I've seen that one in real life also. Those are some neat-looking figures. Unfortunately, the photography here doesn't do it justice, which is unfortunate. So, I saw an interesting quip on TV the other day. It said, if you think about it, we're all half Centaur.
Nice.
Off the shelf. Let's bear in mind that for many of us, it wasn't just playing the games, it was reading the books. And this was before TSR was a novel publishing powerhouse. But there were a lot of us that were reading a lot of really good fantasy books and using them as inspiration as something that we could bring into our games. And Dragon Magazine gave you lots of options for books that you could go grab to talk about, that they would talk about, that you could read and bring into your gaming. What was nice is that the reviews weren't focused on what can you get out of this book for gaming. They would talk about, is this any good as a book? But then what? So, any of them on here you recognize? Any of these you read?
Ooh, that's a fair question. No. I don't see any. No. Not, let me see. No.
I read Escape Velocity long, long ago. Don't remember too much about it. But I do remember reading this one shortly after this issue came out. So, what was nice about it, the note down here on the bottom, all 3 books in the series are excellent and can be read in any order, which was important when you're living overseas and you've only got sort of what's available at the book exchange at the post library that you can, grab and pick and choose with. that you read them in whatever order you can find them. So that was important. Here's the rest of the book ones. So Alana, the Dragon Waiting in the Wild Shore. So there's a couple others there for you.
Yeah, I did read The Wild Shore.
Okay. So hey, we're batting 1 for 8.
Yeah.
You can play for the Brewers.
I was getting ready for college summer school then too, so I can only play so much D&D.
Never the same thing twice. The Rakshasa family.
I gotta say, this one I remember. A friend of mine had it because he was into mythology. That was his thing. And the Rakshasa is a creature of myth, and I remember him telling me that this was that this did a pretty decent job. That the D&D Rakshasa was actually fairly decent.
Yeah. Well, so what always got me about this is, again, with Mystara being my primary game world, ahead even of Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or those others. In the Mystara game world, you had the Rakasta, who were sort of the humanoid tiger people. And there was always the Rakshasa versus the Rakasta, and they were not intended to be the same things, but the names were so similar that people would screw up and think you were referring to one when you were referring to the other.
Okay.
And that always caused some confusion for people who were not sort of dedicated Mystara gamers. But yeah, I do remember this one with trying to, first of all, everybody arguing over how do you pronounce Rakshasa, and I'm like, why don't we just pronounce it how it's spelled? It really doesn't seem to be that difficult. But yeah, here we are. The like you said, these are straight out of mythology, from the mythology of India, right? And
this piece, as I recall it, and I've not seen it in quite a few years, is sort of a thoughtful, and I always appreciate this, and I've said this before. I believe that the best Dungeons and Dragons stories come out of actual myth. I'm not a big fan of the derived myths, with the singular exception of Tolkien. I prefer this, and I like these meditations about where they calibrated, because at least there's a real touchstone there.
Yes.
My son and I just got done watching Thor Ragnarok, and we spent a lot of time talking about Ragnarok itself and the different gods and the different stories and how they vary and that. So it's always nice to see meditations on this stuff. I like that.
Yeah. Yep. And so this second variety of Rakshasa is that of a monster, and these are the Rakshasas of the AD&D game world. And so they're telling you, here's where these have come from, and here's how we're putting them in place, and here's what we're doing. So yeah, like you said, there is a traceable lineage to this critter outside of sort of that usual tried and true Tolkien trope that so much of D&D is derived from.
Is it just me, or do they switch typefaces in mid-article?
It's probably not just you.
Go down one page.
Oh, okay. Let's go see.
Compare that page on the left to the one on the right.
Well, so the stat blocks were always a different typeface, where I think they were created outside of the flow of the article and then pasted in there later.
Okay. All right.
I think that was a fairly common thing for Dragon Magazine for a long time.
Little Brant crazy is rubbing off on me.
Yes. That's what you get when you get a layout dude talking about magazines, right? I mean, that's kind of what happens.
That's only fair.
Yeah. It's what happens when you have guitarists doing music reviews, you know?
Right.
So, all right, let's, Armory paint sets.
It's funny. I mean, no sooner had I said that the Armory absolutely was one of the competitors. I never used their stuff. It's interesting. I never used Armory kit, probably because I couldn't get it where I used to shop, because for me it was Relparth and Poly S, but absolutely Armor. Bigger and better, 1 fluid ounce, easy opening lids. It was a gentler time.
I'm just going through to take a look at where some of these game stores were. see if any of these jump off the screen as ones that I knew or recognized or had been to. Grandview Hobbies in Columbus, Ohio was there well into the 90s.
There's one at Fort Bragg.
So that is Fort Bragg, California.
Right. I was like, that's funny. I just looked at that.
There is a Fort Bragg in California, and it is way up north in the part of California that actually at one point belonged to the Russians.
Oh, I got it.
That's the area where it is. I don't recall whether or not Games Galore was still in Louisville when I lived near there. I'm looking to see what was in North Carolina. Dragon's Nest was in Charlotte for a long time. They were there for quite some time. Strategy and Fantasy World in Falls Church was there for a long time. Campaign headquarters, this is back in their old Queensway Mall location, not the one on Little Creek Road, which is where they are now. Although Little Creek Road, I guess, is... No, there it is. There's the Norfolk one, Little Creek Road. So this was a separate... This was a campaign headquarters outpost. You had the headquarters, and then you had sort of the jump talk floating around out there in Hampton. So...
Games Plus was still in Mount Prospect. God bless them. I'm sure they'll be at Gen Con this year.
Yep.
From Mount Prospect, Illinois.
Yep. Just looking through to see what may have been around that any of us knew about or had gone to.
And there's my point, is that there is nobody in the great state of Wisconsin.
Wow. Yeah. I do think it's interesting, campaign headquarters on Little Creek Road. I mean, this is 84 that this magazine's out, and they're still there, right? They're still on Little Creek Road.
Oh, yeah. Well, the best ones are professionally run. They understand their market. They're not fly-by-night, which is why Games Plus has succeeded the way it has.
Yep. All right, our convention calendar for 84. This is the point in time at which I started to become aware of what conventions were and that these might be kind of cool things. Now, it was still another 8 years before I ever made it to one, but I actually was paying attention to them. Of note, so as we're recording this, we're 10, 15 days out from this year's Origins, but here we are in Origins 84. They were in Dallas, back when they used to bounce around quite regularly. This time they're in Dallas, and that's where they're going to be running out of. So, board gaming, miniatures, role-playing, and role-playing miniatures. Let's note them separately from the rest of role-playing.
Right.
So, and you notice no mention of what the actual games or competitions or guest speakers might be. But, hey, come check us out.
Well, and Origins is running an ad here at the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
So it's, they're up there, but they're also up in the text.
Yeah.
So it's also interesting to note, Little Wars very much in their same time window.
Yeah.
Still there, and still going very strong. Actually, they're I think still the key historical miniatures gaming society Midwest event.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. So in the text, you're right. In the text in where it lists Origins 84, it does list some specific speakers. I'm betting that because the ad had to be in so much earlier that they never quite got all the speakers nailed down before they had to have the ad images submitted. So that probably had something to do with it.
Fred Saberhagen.
Fred Saberhagen and C.J. Cherry, which interestingly, C.J. Cherry is an alum of my high school.
Oh, is that right?
She is. She graduated high school with my high school journalism teacher, actually. My high school journalism teacher stayed in town after college. She came back and was teaching there. But C.J. Cherry, at the time, I believe she was living in Oklahoma. In the time frame that this is happening, she would have been living in Oklahoma City, I think, teaching high school up there and then writing on the side. So it would have been a couple-hour drive for her to get to Dallas. But, yeah, she's an Oklahoma girl. And then there were three. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart because this is the no prefix BECMI D&D. This is putting the C in BECMI, right?
Right.
But who's our guy here? Howdy, Frank. On the off chance that Frank ever ends up stumbling into this, we just want to say hi. I have no illusions at all that he will never hear about this, but, Frank Mincer was responsible for many, many, many lost hours of my youth. But up until the Frank Mincer reboot of what became the BECMI series, you had the Errol Otis Red Box basic set and the Errol Otis Blue Box basic set, and that's as far as they got. And it wasn't until the Frank Mincer reboot that they actually took everything all the way through level 36, which they had hinted at in the Errol Otis boxes, but never actually realized at some point in their publication. And when they rebooted it with the Frank Mincer red box for the basic set, and was it an Elmore cover on the Frank Mincer red box?
Yep.
So once they rebooted it with that one and moved forward from there is when you got all the way through the Immortals set. Of note, at this point, the BECMI world is starting to become more entwined with the idea of Mystara as a game world that really becomes almost inseparable from the rules. Because the only official modules that are being released really at this point forward for the BECMI series of rules are those that are somehow placed in the Mystara game world somewhere. So hanging off of the original X1 map somewhere. The first of the companion series modules, Test the Warlords, takes place far to the north off the edge of the X1 map. And then starts to expand from there. So
see, for me, the whole story is told down at the very bottom, because this is where, to me, and not on this page, but if you go a couple pages hence.
Alrighty, stand by.
Yep.
Keep going.
If you go to his summary.
Hold on, I just want to note. Hey, look, Fantasy Games Unlimited ad.
Fantasy Game Unlimited ad.
Summary. Here we go.
The companion set.
The War Machine mass combat system.
There you go.
So, how much have you ever played games using the War Machine mass combat system?
I have played. Do I get to count its intellectual child
No.
battle system?
No.
Oh, okay. I have played.
There's a reason for that.
Yes, I have played War Machine a dozen times. That means actual battles fought using War Machine.
Because here's the big difference. The battles fought using War Machine were map agnostic.
Correct.
Imagine a mass combat scenario in which the map is irrelevant.
That is correct.
And that was War Machine. And to my knowledge, that's the only one of the TSR and later WotC descendants that made the map irrelevant in mass combat. And the reason when you said, or its spiritual descendant battle system, no, battle system, you still need a map.
Well, battle system was for miniatures.
Exactly. War Machine was not. Was very decidedly not. Now, for folks who don't know what we're talking about, War Machine was essentially, it treated your army as one large being that was statted out. And when you fought your battle, your hit points, and you can't see me holding up the air quotes for hit points, your hit points were the casualties you were taking out of your army. But it was interpersonal combat writ large by making your army the sum of its parts. And off you go. That's how they treat it.
That is right. No, that is right. And yeah, it was pretty crazy because I wanted this a lot because I was simultaneously a historical war gamer. I was much more into the medieval then than I am now. Obviously, my first love is and always will be Napoleonics, but I had more time, I guess, that I painted a fair amount of Normans particularly. And I very much wanted to do a campaign in that era leading up to the Norman conquest. Throw some magic and some dragons in there, but a low magic, low fantasy setting. But run a game based in the period, say, between Rollo's arrival in the 10th century up to the Norman Conquest, sometime in that century.
Yeah.
And War Machine, when I first started hearing about it, I didn't hear about it here. I read about it elsewhere, but I thought, oh my goodness, now I shall be able to do it. Now I will be able to have more than this abstract fighting. I can use my miniatures and things like that. And so when War Machine came out, we certainly gave it a go. We built, in fact, hundreds of armies.
Yeah.
And because they were, as you say, they were incredibly simple to make, because they became miniatures. And I have actually, in one of my conversations with Shane Hensley, he of Savage Worlds and Deadlands, and that he actually has thought a lot about trying to make that system actually work.
Yeah.
Because his mass combat system in Savage Worlds, for evident reasons, isn't dramatically different.
Yeah.
It's, you stat out, you get some things, you get a pool of dice, you roll your dice, you look for successes, and you're done. Because he wants to move on.
Yeah.
He wants to say, there was a fight, here's what happens, and here's why the characters matter in that fight. And that is the thing, ultimately, that I don't know that ever has been successfully pulled apart by anyone ever. The link between, here is our small group of doughty heroes off on their adventure. Oh my God, now they are involved in a continent-shattering war. What is their role? What does that look like?
Yeah, and for anyone under 30 who's listening, the both of you, really what we're talking about is, how do you recreate not simply the action of, but the meaning of the scene when the dwarves come charging out of the Lonely Mountain in the middle of the Battle of Five Armies, right? 12 dwarves should not turn the tide of the battle, and yet they do. So how do you make that happen somehow in a mass combat scenario without it devolving into some giant array of counters and figures in this huge map? And that's tough. That's tough. Takes a good GM above all else, regardless of what the rules might be. That's a tough nut to crack. Right? There's no line about it.
Here was the mention that we were promised. We were promised the War Machine.
Yes. Also of note, this is an attempt to do a simplistic unarmed combat. Interesting that they don't roll it out until you're already up around level 15, when unarmed combat becomes relatively useless, just because you're so high level that what are the odds you're really getting disarmed and not going to have a sword to whack something with?
Right.
But there was an attempt to make a playable unarmed combat that still left some latitude for, am I hitting somebody and am I grabbing somebody? Am I tackling him? Am I pinning him? What am I doing? There was an attempt to actually put together some decent unarmed combat, which was, other than the monk, right, the helicopter fists of death of first edition AD&D, there wasn't a good unarmed combat system out there in the D&D realm. There were other games that had attempted it that really tried to get at this, and interestingly, they chose to tuck it into the companion rules of all places. Also of note, this is where the strongholds really come in, that you get a chance to play the person running the stronghold, and it almost becomes a sort of a political kingdom management kind of game, that really this is the spiritual successor or the spiritual ancestor of Birthright. Right? This was how you ruled your king, and that's really in the companion series rules, they draw a fairly tight delineation between guys that are still adventuring at a really high level and guys that are settling down to rule a kingdom at a really high level. And so who are these people that are working for you? What are they doing? How are they doing things? And you find that in the character classes as they start to draw some lines in there. The other thing that starts to happen at this point is you get to a high enough level that some of the specialization starts to kick in. So in the BECMI series, you see the Druid appear. You see the Paladin, Knight, and Avenger appear. So here comes the chaotic wandering fighter known as the Avenger, right? Must make an alliance with a chaotic church. So you start to find your magic users, landowners versus sort of wandering magic users, if you will. And then the thieves with their Thieves Guild, right? Must contact the Thieves Guild. You don't get to freelance it, right? You got to belong to the local Thieves Guild.
Yes.
The thieves are unionized in this world. But also of note, and again, where we start to see very tight integration between the rules of the game as a whole and the world in which they exist, are these demi-humans. Very limited in terms of experience and hit points, so elves are simply incapable of learning the arts of powerful magic. Go ahead, Chuckle. It's okay.
I'm good. I'm good over here. Thanks.
But when they start talking about each demi-human clan has a sacred item called a relic, which kept at the center of the clan stronghold, and so they've got the Forge of Power for the dwarven clans, the Tree of Life for the elves, the Crucible of Black Flame for the halflings. These are all very Mystara-specific constructs. These are things that really live and die in that world, and you don't ever really find these in any... where in Greyhawk do the halflings tie into these crucibles of Black Flame with their halfling clans? They don't really exist in Greyhawk, in Forgotten Realms, and anywhere else. But they're a very specific and detailed part of Mystara, as is built out later in the Gazetteers as well. So, I think that's really what you start to see with the companion rules, is that they're not afraid to tie the rules into the game world. So, that's something important that I remember of the companion set as it started to come out. So, Twofold Talisman. So here's the first half of it. And take a look at the crew that wrote this one. So it's an RPGA tournament module. Right? Played in 2 parts.
Yep.
And but it's an RPGA tournament module. So this is part of the association. Something that you get to play in there. It's a decent pair of modules. I've played the first one. I never played the second half of it. I also was an RPGA guy where I needed the points from it. So, but here we go. Mansion Grounds. Again, a fairly generic adventure in that it doesn't have to be set in any particular campaign setting. You can tuck it in wherever you want. But here are your character sheets. So here are the folks that you get to play with. You got a gnome illusionist thief, right? There's a handful of multi-class ones in here. The halfling thief, the half-elf cleric ranger. So.
I hate this stuff like a disease.
Sorry.
No, it much like we talk about the arguments about what really happens in a fantasy world as opposed to, well, just play the game, for God's sake. Make it what you want.
Yeah.
I came to similar conclusions about rules. It's like, you want to have worlds where anybody but men can be paladins, human men, by the way, go with your bad self. I will choose to read the first edition where it says male humans. Move on.
Yeah. Well, and not just that, but, they're your rules. Play the rules you want to play.
Yeah, and that's there is no universe in which it's worth spending a moment on that argument.
Yeah.
It's well, there's no such thing as a gnome illusionist thief, 5th level.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
You're right. There is no such thing. However, I would like to play such thing in a game.
In my imagine world, there is. Okay.
Yeah.
You win.
A nice, nifty little castle map, aside from the fact that the walls are paper thin.
Right.
That's always something that's amused me about
That's every castle in the history of D&D.
Yes.
They've basically got cinder block walls.
Yeah. There's our upper level. Again, threatening to crash through the lower level because the walls are so thin. The RPGA Network player ranking system, just in case you were wondering what this does for you. I do like bonus point areas. Fun. Was this group fun to play with? Right? Power abuse.
Yeah, it's been so long since I did an RPGA Network event game.
Yeah. And quite frankly, the fact that there's a rubric for scoring tells you why it's been a long time since I've done it.
Well, and the other thing is, I just spent a little bit of time at the Nexus Game Convention here in Milwaukee, and really, unfortunately, it's a convention that's fallen back a good deal from just last year. But the one thing that was great was just to wander through the RPG area and look at people just having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And if you want to tell, the idea of telling a meta story that everybody gets to be a part of, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. The idea that my character is in some way better than yours, or that that's goofy. That's just goofy.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So fiction. Back when there was still fiction in there. Skip through the fiction here a little bit because we want to talk about the magazine. So order yours today. The contents of the Best of Dragon Volume 1 and Volume 2 and Volume 3. So some Dragon Mirth. Variants. So here are some different variants that were out there. These were all things culled from the earlier from the earlier episode or issues of the magazine. So new NPCs, right? Best of Dragon Volume 2, and you get a whole bunch of NPCs. You get the ninja, and then you get the new and improved ninja.
Have you ever seen one of these?
Yeah, I had number 2.
Did you? Okay.
I might still. I just don't feel like walking across the room to look through the box.
I don't remember having this. I had so bloody many of them, I suppose, but
yeah, it's not like you needed it.
But still. All
right, so here comes the fun bit. The older they get, the better they become. If only that were true of us.
Well, yeah.
Chivalry and Sorcery. How many games you got of it?
40.
More than I do.
Probably. And I'm talking sessions.
Yeah.
Probably about 40. It was, and it's funny. I've been cheating a little bit by poking around here. I'm delighted by the fact that the person who writes this review, and I gather it's Ken. He's doing them all sort of as a group. He says that Chivalry and Sorcery are for the literate sort, the historical sort, as opposed to the what is his phrase? I should be fair to him. What does he actually say? He says, Chivalry and Sorcery is still the most demanding FRP game for an elite audience.
Yeah.
What the material lacks in presentation, it makes up for with unsurpassed treatment of chivalry, sorcery. Okay, thanks, I would hope so. And the FRP campaign. No other FRP approaches the power and detail of its systems. That's quite a bold statement.
Yes, it is.
Especially when it is up against the basic and expert rule set, as you were just discussing, the red and the blue box.
Yep, there they are.
And
Mincer assembled, Elmore illustrated.
Yep.
There they go.
These are, and it's interesting. There's a generational cliff here, because I came in with a bunch of thieves prying a ruby out of the eye of an idol.
Yeah.
That's me. I'm first edition D&D and then AD&D. This is that next generation. And I missed this because I was playing AD&D.
Yeah.
And I do know, though, that a lot of people, this was their gateway.
Yeah. So this wasn't my gateway. My gateway was the Errol Otis red box, followed shortly thereafter by the first edition Player's Handbook and DM's Guide. But I went back to this when it came out. After the Errol Otis red and blue boxes, I went back to this. And the reason I stayed in this was that was the group that I could most easily find someone to play with. But I loved the game world. And so this predates Forgotten Realms by several years.
Yes.
At the time, you had Greyhawk, and you had sort of Judges Guild, because City State of the Invincible Overlord was still out there. Mystara hadn't really coalesced as its own thing, and I don't think Mystara even really got a name until the Gazetteers started coming out in the late 80s. So like 5 years from when this issues being published. But what you did have was the X1 map and things slowly being added to that map is what started to come around. Of note, one of the interesting things, the basic, the companion, the Masters and Immortals boxes all had separate player and DM books. The expert rules had a single book.
Oh, is that right?
Which actually made it really handy to travel with, because quite frankly, 90% of the BECMI role-playing that I did in my life, I could do out of just the expert book.
Sure.
Had most of what I needed in there. Going down, we've got some capsule. So here's where we continue to go through the details of the BECMI series. Here's the buyer's guide. So historically minded, ambitious, and serious gamers. That might have been the little line that you were looking for. Yeah.
That's me.
So, but there's your buyer's guide. Tells you which ones you should get and when. Here's a handful of capsule reviews for some other games.
Just for the record, they will play Monster Squash at Gen Con again this year.
Okay.
It is the guy who wrote it and his wife still run games of it. I've played it half a dozen times over the years. It is as silly, stupid, and fun as it seems.
Yes.
If you ever have a chance to play the Monster Squash, do it and get over yourself.
All right, so here comes Ares. They've taken what was its own separate SPI magazine and rolled it into a separate section within Dragon Magazine. And about 4 or 5 years from now, they will dispense with Ares as its own section altogether, and they will simply spread what was previously the sci-fi specific Ares content across the magazine, which quite frankly was always the right decision anyway. And that's what had happened up until we had the Ares section. But they bought the magazine. They needed to do something with the magazine besides just kill it outright. Hey, look, we didn't kill it. We rolled it into Dragon. Okay,
well,
sure.
I remember this. I was never an Ares subscriber, but I did wonder if this wasn't a way to say, oh, no, your subscription is still good. We're sending you the Dragon.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this is Ares Magazine has now been revived. The guys over at One Small Step have brought back Ares Magazine.
I did see that. That is very cool.
It is very cool. So here is Ares, the science fiction gaming section, and here you go. So that's what we're doing. And so they focus on the moon. So here's the Lunar High Republic, and we've got the Zethra, and we've got Starfire Gaming. Of note, Ed Greenwood writing articles in here. So, but you'll also notice, what are the games we're talking about? Space Opera, Star Frontiers, and Starfire. This isn't just the TSR House organ, people. We've noted this multiple times in this series. So, here's the Lunar High Republic, which again, some interesting reading. If you're not playing a space opera game, I'm not sure how much utility you get out of here other than an enjoyable short read, but it's there. And then, hey look, Fantasy Games Unlimited ad.
Fantasy Games Unlimited ad. I took this as I reviewed it, just going through it. And you'll notice it is sci-fi based.
Yep.
So they clearly linked it. I read this as we had nothing else, so we had our best writers try to put something onto the page.
Yeah. Well, and what's
honestly, there's none of these articles that is worth a damn.
No. Well, here's what they are, though. They are, while they are targeted to a particular game set or game world set somehow, what they are is these are essentially National Geographic articles for a place that doesn't exist.
Sure. And
that's not a bad read. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's what these are. These are National Geographic articles for a place that doesn't actually exist. So here's your Zethra, an NPC race for Star Frontiers. But you're right. I mean, this is a bit of a space filler. And then coming soon, the Marvel Superheroes Heroic Role-Playing Game. Interesting that they include the Marvel Superheroes ad within the Ares section, because the Marvel file ended up being a significant contributor to the content of the Ares section, where they statted out. I mean, it's almost like they just sort of randomly flipped through the official handbook of the Marvel Universe and landed on random pages and said, all right, stat those guys out and run them in Ares this month.
Yes.
And Hey, look, Jeff Grubb cashed a lot of paychecks on that, so I can't really fault him for keeping it up. But that's really what happened for the next 5-6 years. So here are the information about the Zethra. Here's our third revision of Gamma World at this point. Second or third?
It should be second.
Should be the second revision. And here's Starfire Gaming ×3. So, in case Delta V wasn't already driving you nuts with trying to simulate space combat, we're going to give you something else. Some simultaneous movement.
We've actually talked on the GrogCast with Dr. Starrett about, how you get sci-fi space firing. There's really two broad perspectives on this. Arch physical, arch accurate, crunchy, hard, and Star Wars.
Yeah.
And, there are some that do the overlap, but, look, we have it right here at the bottom of page 84. We have a hypotenuse determination table. I think we know what they were shooting for.
Yes. And although some of the typography gacks up in a few places, at least they're all in reasonably straight columns that we can still follow.
I could follow these columns, as you say, despite the interesting run at vertical difference 6.
Yeah. So, but yes, they were definitely going for crunchy at this point. All right, our gamer's guide. Some interesting, fun little classified ads at the time, and then this thing. What the flurp? I gotta. What's going on here?
What are you talking about?
System Ultimatum, a correspondence game set in the far future on a war-ravaged Earth. Players choose from one of 3 character classes. Stalkers,
who are
super policemen, gladiators, children gone amok, or gamesters, fugitives from the system. I mean, this sounds like a wacky concept. But first of all, why am I going to be a stalker if I've got to pay an extra $1.50 a turn over the gamesters?
Did you notice? Don't you love that? Don't you love the fact that for some reason the gamesters get the deal?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Is that it's what I? That's so great. The thing that struck me as I was glancing through these, we just got done running this year-and-a-half Kriegspiel on the GrogCast, on the GrogHeads main page, and I thought, man, $1 a turn, you say? Damn, I'd have made some real Gen Con money.
Yeah, no kidding.
But no, it's just this is really indicative of how I just look back and look. I saw these things. I've actually played PBEM or played by SM, I guess, Snail Mail. I've done it. I get this, but it is amazing to me to look back over this gap of 30-odd years and see that we were willing to pay this much money and what you would get in the mail, folks, if you don't know,
what?
Is a dot matrix printed sheet.
Yeah.
No graphics, no beautiful color cards. You would get just plain text saying what happened to your characters.
I dare say there weren't a lot of people paying money to play this one.
This one probably not. but as we have discussed on previous episodes of Dragging Up the Past, there was a magazine that tracked these.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So definitely a something there. So hang on just a second. I'm looking something up. I grabbed the phone here real quick because I got to look and see where this is. I'm looking over here at the figure sculpting. One-of-a-kind figure sculpting.
Yep.
And Joel Haas on Merriman Avenue here in Raleigh, where I live. And I'm looking to see where exactly that is. And it's about where I thought it was. The part of town where I thought it was. This is right near the old college neighborhoods that I used to live in and regularly haunt. This is just a little west of where I used to live, but I know this part of town pretty well. I'm really curious whatever may have happened to Joel Haas at some point in there, and if he's still in the area here, and if he's still involved in gaming at all. I'm gonna have to try and look this dude up and see. Or you're gonna look him up in the background and let me know.
I'm working on that.
All right, elsewhere in our Gamer's Guide, your own full figure character. So I don't think they meant full figure in the sense of sort of body style. I think they meant art style. I don't know that we were after necessarily full figure characters. I'm full figured enough. Yeah, no kidding. And then there's our Dragonbone Dice Wand. Elmore's still got Snarf Quest going. And we're going to skip our way through there. And here's the last of our What's News for quite some time with Phil and Dixie. And then there's the sign-off. And here's some Dragon Mirth. Of note, here they are making fun of Phil and Dixie. I'm sorry, you must have the wrong page. By having Phil guest appear in What's New there. From What's New. And here we go. Here's our first look at, coming soon, Dragonlance.
Oh, yes.
The cottage industry that became Dragonlance. And we shall find a Dragon magazine down the line that includes Dragonlance as a key centerpiece soon. Back cover, Merc. Ice is, again, spending big bucks to keep the advertising front and center. Now, I will say, when we talk about our Ice role-playing challenge, we're not looking for people that played Merc, right?
Nope.
We know who you guys are. We are some of you guys. We're not looking for people that played Merc. We're looking for people that played the Arms Law, Claw Law, Spell Law. We want somebody that's played the Rollmaster series, not Merc. We know the Merc gamers are out there. So we're not after you guys. All right, Jim, Dragon 84, what'd you think?
Joel Haas is apparently something of a legendary figure sculptor. Worked with Prince August to create a whole lot of historical miniatures. And as of spring 2017, he was taking photographs in Prospect Hill, North Carolina.
Okay, so he's still somewhere near the area here. I shall track him down, if only to let him know that we mentioned him in our video series. Looking at the episode, I'm going to put it at the mid. I'll put it in the middle. It didn't make me angry. There's nothing in it that made me angry. There are a few things that were of value that were worth seeing, but I don't know that other than the article on the coming of the compendiums, that it really moved the ball forward. And it also had an ad for Lords of Creation, which is always special. Yes. Well, but again, this one I grabbed because this was the first appearance of Ares in Dragon magazine. And it's a bit of a milestone.
That is a big moment. That is for those of us of a certain age, that was and in some ways it's a sad thing because Ares came out with games that are still played.
Yes. Barbarian Kings.
To the point that after, again, my son and I watched Thor Ragnarok, I've gotten a hold of Don from Enterprise Games, and I'm going to ask him to bring me his version of Ragnarok that appeared in Ares magazine to the con so that I may buy it.
Yes.
I had it. I lost it along with the blistered Twilight of the Gods from TSR. So I'm going to get that. So no, this was a great magazine from the glory days of that weird entity that was SPI. So yeah, you're right. This is definitely a pivoting time. But I'm going to give it a C+ as a magazine.
Well, and I don't know that this was intended to necessarily be one of those jaw-dropping highlight magazines, but True. Your jaw doesn't drop without ones like this to compare it to.
That is an accurate statement.
So, all right, let's put the stake through 84 here. I got to go pick my son up at his job training, and we'll call it a night, and we will see all of you guys again on our next episode of Dragging Up the Past.
Take care, everybody.